Histrionic personality disorder and spirituality. This is Shores of Infinity with a video about the histrionic personality disorder with the host Chris speaking. We've talked already about narcissistic, borderline and antisocial personality disorder and codependency, and today histrionic. That's the last big one that we will talk about here in this series, and it's very interesting. Because it seems like sometimes there is no histrionic personality disorder. It's just a combination of narcissistic, borderline and antisocial. And indeed, in my experience, it is the case that most people who have one personality disorder will have two or three. There will be one main one and one or two other additional ones, but in a slight intensity. Remember, we measure from 0 to 5. 0 is none, 1 and 2 is very little, and 4 and 5 is very strong. So often someone has a personality disorder of, for example, borderline 3, and then also antisocial and histrionic at 1. At first glance, histrionic looks like borderline, but there's a difference. Borderline is flooded by his or her emotions. And again, we have as many male histrionic as female histrionic personality disorders. It's just they express slightly differently. Borderliners are flooded by their emotions, and the driving force is desperation. They're really totally desperate, so they lash out. They both feel insignificant. But while the borderliner feels non-existence, the histrionic it's bad, but still it's not as bad as borderline, feels insignificant. And you probably know that for most people, being ignored is one of the greatest social pains. To be screamed at and threatened is not as bad for most people as being ignored. And histrionics, they feel ignored all the time, they feel insignificant all the time, so they compensate this with attention seeking. They always want to be the center of attention. We call them drama queens in day-to-day language. They like to dramatize everything, catastrophize everything. They like to tell stories. They're great storytellers, the greatest. I've known a few, and they can tell stories that's flabbergasting. You're spellbound. Most of it is totally over-exaggerated or even invented, of course, but it's still fun to listen to them. Many of them are great actors. Even professionally, many great actors have a little bit of histrionic personality disorder. There was this discussion recently when Johnny Depp broke up with Amber Heard. If Amber Heard, or maybe both of them, had histrionic personality disorder. Who knows? But everything you hear about Amber Heard could be. But those online diagnoses, they're often fraught with danger and fault, of course. So the histrionic personality disorder has the lying part of the antisocial, the emotional outbursts of the borderline, and the grandiosity of the narcissist. Often it is said that the emotionality of histrionics is fake. Like also the antisocial and narcissist and even the psychopath, who's a totally different order of magnitude, they fake emotions. Well, the borderliner has very, very strong emotions. I'm not quite sure if this is true, but that's the mainstream picture. If this attention seeking doesn't work anymore, there are two next stages or steps where the histrionic can fall into. Either it's retreat and pushing away everyone around them, or it's aggression and grandiosity, and that looks a lot like a narcissist. Sam Vaknin even he claims that all histrionics are also narcissists to some degree. There's another thing that borderliners and histrionics have in common, but maybe it's stronger in histrionics, is to look amazing externally. Just recently I met an acrobat who most probably has histrionic personality disorder, and yeah, he looks like a piece of art. The tattoos he have and whatnot. Of course, women have probably more choice in appearing flamboyant and seductive than men. Probably the way you can dress as a woman is probably can be more intense without seeming totally strange or sleazy. Histrionics like to control the other gender with their external coquetries, because it's not meant, like they don't really want to flirt, they just want to see, can I control this one? Could I have him or her if I wanted to? That's enough. They don't really want to jump into bed, they just want to know, am I good enough a flirter to put him or her under my spell? The term, unfortunately, is very outdated. Histrionic. It's a misogynistic term. Back in the old days, like 100 years ago or more, the male psychiatrists and doctors, they thought that only women freak out like that only women have emotional outbursts. This is, of course, completely not true. Like, who would possibly think that? But yeah, maybe society-wise it was not okay for men to express this, so not many did openly in public, but only at home. So both the terms hysteria and histrionic, they derive from the Greek word of uterus. Uterus is Latin. In ancient Greek it's hystra. Hystra is the ancient Greek word for uterus. So these stupid doctors 100 years ago, they thought, okay, what could cause this strange behavior in women? The most pronounced anatomical difference is the uterus, so it must be the uterus. And even nowadays it's often blamed on hormones. This is all bullshit. There are just as many women as men who can and will freak out, who are drama queens and drama kings and tell tall tales and want to be the center of attention. So I hope they will change this term in the future. It's just not very nice. Yet this is the image that is behind it. A woman who's completely freaking out because of jealousy, for example. Hell hath no fury as a woman's scorn. But we have male examples of this as well. Othello, for example, Shakespeare's Othello, who kills his wife out of jealousy. The Roman Emperor Nero, who had probably all kinds of personality disorders. But what about in spirituality? This video is actually about histrionic personality disorder and spirituality. You can read up on it or listen to videos on histrionic personality disorder. There are some good ones, Sim Vaknin, for example, or Dr. Ramani. Although it's very difficult to get a clear picture. That's why I sometimes doubt that it is an ailment of its own. And as always, someone who might have a slight histrionic personality disorder might actually have codependency disorder, which is the most common one in spirituality. Definitely the cause is always a complex trauma. Complex post-traumatic stress syndrome is the cause of all these personality disorders. Usually stemming from childhood and very often being caused by the parents who had themselves a personality disorder. So if you were ignored as a child, it might be that you have developed histrionic personality disorder. The only way to survive was to act out and force the attention upon you. Now, there have been quite a few spiritual gurus who have this slightly, 1 or 2. I mean, intensity 1 or 2, not 1 or 2 gurus. Many gurus had this at 1 or 2. There was a question recently, is it really necessary to do trauma therapy, or can these personality disorders and other things like addictions and whatnot disappear on your spiritual path, on the course of your spiritual path? If you get along, if you progress well, can they not just disappear by themselves? Theoretically, yes. Practically, they're usually too much of an obstacle. This is what will hold you back. This is what will hold your progress back. I think that's why I make videos about it. One of the greatest reasons why so many people struggle to either reach enlightenment or to maintain an abiding long-time state of enlightenment are these personality disorders, or are other kinds of complex post-traumatic stress syndrome symptoms. Being a personality disorder or ADHD or an addiction, OCD, you name it. These things will hold you back, and if you get rid of them, your spiritual progress will be much, much faster. The trouble with these personality disorders is that they're always coupled with some grand delusion. There's always some fantasy that they have created about themselves and about the world. Either a grandiose fantasy, or that they are the worst person and the most worthless person, or even both alternatingly. Those of you who have listened will probably now think, okay, you said two things which contradict each other. On the one hand, you said a personality disorder like this one will be an obstacle to spiritual progress. On the other hand, you said many spiritual gurus had this disorder slightly. How is that possible? Well, if you know my channel, then you know that in my view, most spiritual gurus are not enlightened. That is the solution. They're slightly ahead, but it's like the one-eyed leading the blind. Most of them are very, very far away from enlightenment. And this is the danger, of course. Yeah? People who have a personality disorder like histrionic, borderline, or narcissist, they have a lot of charisma. And it's easy for them to convince others that they have something which they have really not, because they have done this their whole lives. They're such good liars and fakers, such good storytellers. It's almost like magic. They really can spellbind their audience. That's what they do. And if they find out that they can get a lot of attention by being a spiritual guru, this is what they might try to do, and often successfully so. The interesting thing is always to meet them behind the scenes, not on stage. On stage, it's acting. Or it can be acting. Anyway, even if you're a genuine enlightened guru, on stage is different. You're downloading stuff. You're not the same thing as you are on your own. Not on stage, without an audience. But histrionics are the perfect actors and actresses. So of course they can also act to be a spiritual guru or speaker or whatever, and many do. It's not so difficult to find out the right words, to find out what the right lingo is. For example, in this Neo-Zen or Neo-Advaita or I don't know what. You can just repeat the right sentences and words that sound very wise, but there's nothing behind it. There's no understanding, there's no realization, there's no living, there's no experience behind it. Recently I made 2 videos about this Watkins list. There was this magazine, British bookshop magazine, who are the most popular 100 spiritual people alive. And most of them are not spiritual at all. They're just famous. Famous influencers or best-selling authors. And most of those were totally fake. F for fake. No truth behind it. All just steam talkers, as they say. All that comes out of their mouths is hot air. No content, no truth. But people lap it up because that's what they want to hear. That's what they want to hear. And those famous influencers tell people what they want to hear. And then they get famous, more and more famous. While on this channel, I tell you what you don't want to hear. Or at least what most people don't want to hear. Most people want some kind of recipe. Okay, if you want enlightenment, you do these and these meditations and exercises and whatnot. And then if you practice enough, you will get there. That's bullshit. That's a sales pitch. It has nothing whatsoever to do with reality, but it sells well. But selling well is not the purpose of this channel. The purpose of this channel is to create a bit of counterweight to all the bullshit that is out there. As always, if you suffer from histrionic personality disorder or know someone, know it is treatable. Personality disorders in mainstream psychology count as not treatable. This is not true. They are treatable. It's a form of PTSD, and PTSD is treatable. Okie dokie. Thank you for watching, subscribing and listening. Thank you for joining me as a patron. Thank you to those who have already joined me as a patron. Thank you very much.